towards restarting the Monday or Tuesday night halacha chabura, I thought we'd try something a little bit different for 1 week, and that is rather than learning a sugya in Shulchan Aruch, to try a different genre, to spend tonight on a journey through a journey through Lomdus, a Lomdus journey in the parsha. In the past, we've learned Sefer Chinuch, written by Rishon, not clear who, some Talmud of the Ramban, who wrote a Sefer HaMitzvahs, which is famous for not only talking about the halacha, but talking about the machshava as well. But Sefer Chinuch is usually published together with the Minchas Chinuch, which is a fascinating sefer written by an extraordinary Talmud Chacham, Yosef Babad, I believe was his name. Incredible baki and an incredible charif. I think he was a Rav of Tarnopol, which apparently was a very small community. I think it's usually assumed that he didn't have the sort of teaching opportunities. He was overqualified for his job. He didn't really have the audience in town to be able to share even a fraction of the learning that he had. And so he decided to invest it, and he took care of the people in town. He invested his learning into a sefer, and he was looking for a chance to, he was looking for a platform or a frame that would allow him to write on Kol Tarkula. Because as becomes clear from the sefer, he had the breadth and depth to discuss Kol Tarkula magnificently. And so he wrote what's officially a Sefer HaChinuch, as a Sefer HaMitzvahs. It takes you through every single mitzvah. Every single topic is there. So he wrote Minchas Chinuch that would accompany the Sefer HaChinuch. That gives an opportunity to discuss every single sugya in Shas. Anything he wants to talk about. There's one of the Targum mitzvahs is going to be the base, the address to talk about. As a matter of fact, he's famous for saying that the more common mitzvahs, Ein Darki Laharich. It's not my style to spend a lot of time on my sefer on things I already discussed thoroughly in the poskim. This isn't Arachaim Yordea, Yoni me, they're big svarim. Incredible Talmud Chacham and extraordinarily creative thinker. So I wanted to take, and his mind jumps from topic to topic. So the Mitzva of Milah appears in this week's parsha. It's for the Sefer HaChinuch, who counts mitzvahs in the order of appearance in the Torah. So the Mitzvah of Milah is Mitzvah number 2, because Puravu is in Bereshis, and then Milah is in Lech Licha. And he opens by telling us, the Sefer HaChinuch opens by telling us the Mitzvah of Milah. It appears here and appears again in the beginning of Parsha Shmini. A serious mitzvah. A mitzvah to remove the arla b'yom hashmini or later, and talks about it's one of the rare mitzvahs. It's one of the rare mitzvahs that carries with it the unusual severity of an onish kares. Only 2 mitzvahs, Pesach and Milah. Only there are over 30 isurim which carry with them that severe penalty of kares, but only 2 mitzvahs aseh, Pesach and Milah. They happen to be interconnected thematically, not only because you have to have had a Bris Milah in order to eat Karban Pesach, but also because obviously both of those mitzvahs are very central to our identity as Jews. Karban Pesach is the celebration of the national birthday of Klal Yisrael, and Milah is an individual sense of connection to the tzibur of Klal Yisrael. That's part of the reason. One of the reasons why Milah is a rare mitzvah in that it carries with it 2 different birkos hamitzvahs. The Mohel says the al hamilah, and the father says la hachnisa b'rvitzo shalvar avinu, and both of those are birkos hamitzvahs. Both of those are sher kedisham sosav v'tzivam. So the Beis Yosef discusses why you have one mitzvah with two brachas, and one of the approaches is that there's sort of 2 layers to the mitzvah of Milah. The technical mitzvah of Milah, and then there's sort of and that's Al HaMilah recited by the Mohel. Then there's the broader Hachnasa Bris, and that may refer to different things. One of the things that may refer to is becoming a part of Klal Yisrael. This is a mitzvah that connects us to Klal Yisrael. That's why it's a mitzvah that's not only for Jewish babies but also for Gerim, because once again, the Bris Milah is such a central aspect of our of a man's citizenship in Klal Yisrael, that in order to become a member of Klal Yisrael, you need the mitzvah of Milah. And that, again, may explain also why Milah and Pesach are the two mitzvahs that carry with them the ownership of kares. So I want to actually take a look deep into the Sefer Chinuch. Sefer Chinuch goes on for 3 pages about the mitzvah, and the Minchas Chinuch goes on for 10 pages. He has so much to say. Both because Milah is so rich, and also because there are certain topics and certain ways of thinking that, as we'll see in a couple of moments, ideas that will recur from time to time, in different mitzvahs, in different contexts. So in the opening mitzvahs, the mitzvah of Peruvu, the mitzvah of Milah, a lot of concepts that he's presenting for the first time, he tells you when it could be coming across this later. These will be tools for thinking. So I'd love to start, and let's bring it up on the screen for those who are zooming. I'd love to start from on page of days near the end of the first column, in Os Yud Ches. Okay. Howie, Ari, you can see that?
Yep, I see it.
Okay.
Yep.
So the derech of the Minchas Chinuch often is to sort of take particular mitzvahs and see how they fit into larger categories. So let's take a little bit of a journey of thought, a journey of Lomdus, a journey of Pilpul with the Minchas Chinuch. We're going to pick up the Dibra Maschel Ach. There's a near the end of the 3rd paragraph of Rosh Hashanah, there's a blot or 2. Rosh Hashanah Daf Chav Ches, Rosh Hashanah Daf Chav Tes, that are chock full of all sorts of global concepts about mitzvahs. And one of the major concepts that appear at the end of the 3rd paragraph of Rosh Hashanah is a question of mitzvahs tzrichas kavanah. I do a mitzvah, if I when I perform a mitzvah, so the Amoraim, the Rishonim who hold that mitzvahs tzrichos kavanah, the mitzvahs require intent, they hold that every behavioral mitzvah, every mitzvah ma'asis, every chovas ha'ivarim, whenever there's a physical active mitzvah, it always has a mental part as well. It's not enough to blow shofar. I have to intend that I'm doing Ratzon Hashem by hearing the shofar. I don't necessarily have to think about all the themes and ideas behind shofar, but mitzvah tzrichas kavana means that it's not enough to listen to the shofar. I need to intend thereby to do a mitzvah. I have to have kavanah l'shem mitzvah. So, for instance, the Gemara talks there at the end of the 3rd paragraph of Rosh Hashanah, Tokei l'shir. I'm listening to a shofar for its musical context. Let's say, there's a fall concert in the park, and there's a display in the park of all sorts of ethnic musical instruments from around the world. It's a nice September afternoon. I go to the park, I'm listening to instruments from Africa, I'm listening to instruments from South America, and there's someone blowing a shofar. I might not even know that's Rosh Hashanah, but it's very pretty. The fellow is blowing tekiah, shvarim, chua, tekiah, and I listen. I did the act of listening to the shofar, maybe even did the act of blowing the shofar, but my intent was just musical. My intent was not religious. Am I yotze or not? Tokei or l'shir? The Gemara says that depends on whether you hold mitzvahs tzrichas kavanah, mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavanah. Mitzvahs tzrichas kavanah, you're not yotze. Mitzvahs ain't tzrichas because you didn't have kavanah, let's say. The mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavanah, and then all you need is just the physical act. So he says that the Shagas Aryeh, welcome in. The Shagas Aryeh in his Sefer Turei Even on Maseches Rosh Hashanah, several other svarim. And here we go. Pick up right here. It goes the Dasa Turei Even Rosh Hashanah Daf Chav Tes. The Shagas Aryeh comes up with the following chiddush. He says this idea of mitzvah tzrichas kavanah, which is very broad application. But if you hold mitzvah tzrichas kavanah, dafka b'matzah v'shofar, that's a mitzvah like matzah and shofar, where after Stamma Lishmakai, usually you assume a religious person who's blowing shofar, a religious person who's eating matzah. So you could have made the argument that Stamma Lishma, he probably intends to do it l'shem mitzvah. You know there's a mitzvah of matzah, you know tonight is Pesach. That would be an argument in favor of ein tzrichas kavanah. You don't have to have any direct intent, but Shofar zeh or matzah zu in a miyuchadim davka l'mitzvah. Even you assume, here's a religious Jew, observant Jew, probably wants to be yotzei mitzvah of shofar, probably wants to be yotzei mitzvah of matzah. Okay, but who says it needs to be this shofar? Who says it needs to be this matzah? In other words, these aren't unique; they're replicable. They're not miyuchadim davka l'mitzvah. The efshalat says b'shofar acher or matzah acheres. I could hear the shofar now if I didn't have kavan l'shem mitzvah. Maybe that was just for practice, just to get into the mood, or just because he's an amazing Baal Talkeah. I love listening. No religious content. But I know there's a mitzvah of shofar. Yeah, I'll be yotzei later. This matzah was just to see how it came out. We had gone baking. I want to see how it came out. And later on, I'll have a shem mitzvah. So whenever it's the sort of thing, there's always another shofar, there's always another matzah. Maybe that's why mitzvah's trichas kavana. Plus, Minchas Chinuch says there's another aspect to the matzah and the shofar. Od lo nizbatel ha-mitzvah, avdeni otzeata, od yochol lotzeis. Doing it once, eating matzah, I have room in my belly for more than one piece of matzah. So if I ate matzah once and for some reason I wasn't yotzei, I could always do it again. So there's nothing unique about the shofar or this matzah, and it's a sort of act that's replicable, that's repeatable. So here he says, what he's saying it's up for obviously is our mitzvah. The Shagas says, how about Milah? How about Milah? The Shagas says, Kadshim or Milah, a korban or Bris Milah, very different mitzvahs, but they share this. Mitzvah zubiyuchedas begufo. The korban is a specific animal that I'm meant to bring as a korban. Or Bris Milah, this person requires a milah. There's no other item that I can use, no other person instead of this baby that I can use for the milah on this baby. This is the only one. And I can't do it twice. I can't do it. If the arla was removed in a way that was not a mitzvah of milah, so obviously I cannot remove the arla again. So then maybe we should say eina tzricha kavana. So that's the idea of the Turi Evan. That's fascinating in its own right. Sorry, maybe it already gets us thinking conceptually about how the mitzvah of Milah differs from many other mitzvahs. It needs to be this baby, and it can only be done once. It cannot be repeated. Either you're yotzei or you're not yotzei. And the Shagas Ari raises those uniquenesses of just the quality of the act of Milah as basis for maybe it's an exception to the rule again. Shagas Ari's point was maybe it's an exception to the general rule of mitzvahs trichas kavana. And once again, there's a machlokas in the Gemara, and machlokas from had a paskin where the mitzvahs trichas kavana and trichas kavana. That's an open question. Shulchan Aruch indicates that we should be machmer by daraisas, but that's a machlokas. But again, we are machmer at least by daraisas mitzvahs trichas kavana. But Shagas Ari said, yeah, that's for shofar and lulav, but not for bris milah. Yeah, questions.
Is the other difference between Milah and other mitzvahs that Milah, there's two people involved. There's the father and the baby. The baby obviously can't have kavana, at least at 8 days old. But then when he's older, if the father is not around, then it's a mitzvah and a misal. So and maybe at that point, it sort of shifts to have like it's sort of a weird mitzvah in and of itself because there's two people involved, and it shifts from one person to another, and that clearly would impact whose kavanah is involved as well.
Yeah. So Glenn, you're making a very good point, which is sort of a whole other field. There's so much to encompass in Milah, which is why we're up to Osyu Tess here, and he's nowhere near done. We're going to see. We're going to be surgically jumping in. But you are raising one of the fascinating pieces that unfortunately we're not going to get to tonight is that question of who's the mitzvah on, who upon whom does the mitzvah devolve? Who's the mitzvah in the mitzvah? The Gemara says in Kiddushin that it begins as a mitzvah on the father, and if the father doesn't fulfill his mitzvah to take care of the milah of his baby son, then for the rest of the child's pre-bar mitzvah years, it moves to Beis Din, meaning Klal Yisrael as a whole is chayav in the milah if the father isn't stepping up, and the Beis Din is a representative of Klal Yisrael. And then when the Nisgadil, if a Jewish boy reaches bar mitzvah, it doesn't have a bris milah, so it's his mitzvah. So Minchas Chinuch actually earlier, one of his first discussions in mitzvah Beis is how does that work? So does that mean now it's only the son's mitzvah, and now it's no longer anyone else's mitzvah? Or it's sort of now there are two tracks. That's interesting. So you are making a good point, especially if you understand that the mitzvah totally switches over from father to son. So then maybe that is definitely a uniqueness of the mitzvah of Milah. And by the way, that's sort of that the fact that there are two tracks in mitzvah of Milah is also here's another sort of just throwing out something to think about. We mentioned before there's kares on Milah. So there's a big discussion, Rambam, right, but others. What does that kares look like exactly? Who gets kares? So it's broadly assumed, we generally assume that the kares is not for the father, it's only the son. Of course, to figure out what does that mean? The son is chayiv kares the moment you turn bar mitzvah, you haven't taken care of the bris milah the next day, or if he lives his entire life without milah, but then of course he's passing away. So when does the kares kick in? So that's a fascinating question that flows from that point you're making. It is a unique mitzvah in that way also. Yeah, so that could also play in. Yeah.
How many mitzvahs are saved have an ownership to not do them?
Oh, right. Oh, that's how we got started.
If the mitzvahs are saved, that like you said, so this one's a weird assay because there actually is an owner.
Yeah.
However, how you want to explain the owner? So
yes.
So
Rabbi, we can't hear the questions. So could you repeat the questions from?
Honor, because it's a separate aspect to it. It's not just a regular. It's a set.
Yeah. Eric's pointing out that the mitzvah of Milah is unique. We got started. We mentioned that there's kares only for Milah and for Karban Pesach. The vast majority of the chiyuvei kares are for mitzvahs lo saseh. Onshim in general, are so onshim that the halacha discusses are generally associated more with the isurim, and kares in particular is almost exclusively for isurim. So Milah, so we said before, Milah and Pesach, maybe what makes them unique is the Chumash says that there's kares, but what does that point to? So before we're talking from a philosophical standpoint, from a machshava standpoint, it is true that halachically speaking, kares. The halacha recognizes that kares or misas based in are markers that what you're dealing with is a davar chamor. Even in the end of Maseches Yom, we talk about what dal chiluke kapara averos chamuros require more steps for kapara than averos kalos. What makes something chamura? Typically, misas based in kares. Kares is a marker that you're dealing with something more chamor. So before we were saying from a machshava standpoint. What makes Milah and Pesach particularly Chamor, perhaps, is that they have to do with the citizenship in Klal Yisrael. Eric, you're pointing to the fact that it sounds as though there's an Isser, and that actually vaults us into where the Minchas Chinuch is going to take us next. Because from this discussion about mitzvahs trichas kavana, so he says, the Shagas Aryeh thinks mitzvah tzrichas kavana, but it doesn't apply to Bris Milah. That's a chiddush of the Shagas Aryeh. Again, it's fascinating. It has to do with the sort of the uniqueness of Milah in a technical sense. It's only here's the baby, and you can. It's an activity that cannot be repeated. And as Glenn pointed out, it's also these two tracks sort of make it unique, and maybe that discontinuity has to do with it. But on the other hand, not everyone has to agree with Shagas Aryeh. So it says the very end of paragraph Yudches, l'hasovre Milah tzricha kavana. If you dispute the Shagas Aryeh's chiddush in a sefer Turei Even, you say no, Milah does require kavana, or miskavein befeiru shelo. Let's say you, why I want to do this is beyond me, but hypothetically, a fellow does bris milah, says I'm not trying to do the mitzvah. He's only doing it for medical reasons. Kavana shelo, let's say. So then, after the tzarich won't have bris. So you may say that that wasn't a valid milah, and you're gonna have to have bris. So he first gets involved. I want to speak briefly about the next paragraph outside, then jump to Oschav Beis. he's trying to wrap his mind around this, and he says this whole kavana business, and it gets him from kavana into the nature of the mitzvah meal. It's going to bring us back to what Eric was saying. Is there an asay here? Is there a los asay? He wants to know the following question. So let's say I did a bris milah on Yom Tov. I'm going to streamline what he says a little bit. Did a bris milah on Yom Tov. You're not allowed to do a bris milah on Yom Tov. Shlo bizmana. Milah bizmana is docha Shabbos Yom Tov. But a milah shlo bizmana, if for whatever reason you didn't do the milah on day 8, whether for legitimate reasons like medical reasons or they were just lazy, whatever it is, for any reason the bris milah will be done after day 8. It's not docha Shabbos and it's not docha Yom Tov either. That's explicit mishnayos in the 19th parak of Shabbos. And even though milah is an asay and doing malacha and Yom Tov is a los asay, asay docha los asay, but it still doesn't kick in. But he wants to know asay docha los asay, asay docha los asay. To the extent that asay docha los asay applies, and he has a rivo who says it does somewhat, at least you wouldn't get malchus. So he wants to know, let's say I did milah, the riva would hold that if you did milah on Yom Tov, the asay still knocks out the los asay to the extent that you don't get malchus. How about if you did the milah on Yom Tov shlo b'kavana? Got that? The milah on Yom Tov, I'm not allowed to, milah shlo b'zman on Yom Tov, not allowed to do that. But I should still say asay docha los asay. How if I did the bris milah shlo b'kavana? So what's the question? Let's think about that. Well, if you dispense with the shagasari, you say, no, mitzvah tzrich is going even by milah. So it wasn't Mekayim the mitzvah. So how could I say the chalosa say if I wasn't Mekayim the mitzvah? But then he says, that's what you would have assumed offhand. On the other hand, take a look at the last 2 lines of this column. O Dilma, lo dami, lo shofar v'lulav. Maybe there it's different. Shofar and lulav shlo b'kavan lo niskayim ha'asei klal. You didn't accomplish anything. V'tzarach lasos ora apam. If I hold mitzvah tzrichas kavana and I go to hear a music festival and I hear the shofar, but no kavana l'shem mitzvah, so what I get? 0. I'm going to have to repeat shofar again. I've accomplished nothing. Okay. But by milah, here's where it gets interesting. Milah, and here's another way in which the fact that milah is not replicable plays out. I am not going to do the milah again. You'll say, look, I'm not going to get schar for the mitzvah if I didn't have kavana. But on the other hand, mikol makom, ha-mitzvah nases me'eleha. The mitzvah happens. The mitzvah was done. Nechtachar laso. This child has now been relieved of his arla. So I didn't have kavana. I don't get schar for the mitzvah. But on the other hand, the deed is done. The result is accomplished. Sounds like he's trying to think about Gav Chefza, right? He's trying to think about, is it just the act as a mitzvah, or even if I didn't do a mitzvah again but through the Maisa Milah, maybe it was done. It was done. So he's not so happy with that. Tzara Rishonira, and they'll take question as says, it may have been removed, but I didn't get any mitzvah. I can say Dochalos. It's not that I did the mitzvah, it's just Ein Lo B'Melakayimo, the Mayasa. I didn't do the mitzvah. Look, if I blew shofar once and then if I blew shofar in a manner that I wasn't Yotze and the shofar breaks, so now I can't be Mekayim of the mitzvah anymore. So here, if we went to do the milah once incorrectly, it's physically impossible to repeat, but it doesn't mean I've done a mitzvah. But that thinking gets you wondering about the following. You move down to page Chav Beis, to Os Chav Beis. He says, so let's think about that situation a little bit. So now there's no milah, but there's no mitzvah. No milah, but there's no arla, but there's no mitzvah. Okay, so there's no arla. I missed my chance to do it as a mitzvah. If I don't hold the shagasari, I did the milah shal b'kavana, I wasn't yotze. And the Minchas Chinuch thinks, it wouldn't even say there's no mitzvah whatsoever. It wouldn't save you from malchus. I did the milah shal b'kavana, I wasn't yotze. Now what? So we know this idea of hatafas dan bris, and whether it's a baby or a ger who lacks an arla. So there's is a requirement, the discussion in the Sugya and Shabbos, but it's when it applies. But he points out the Rambam and some others seem to think that's only Drabanan. So let's think about that. All these threads that we've been talking about are now going to come together in this final discussion. So let's say you have a situation, how tough is done Bris situation. Nira ani is daiti. Take a look at near the end of the second. The Torah writes that it's a mitzvah to remove the arla, the mitzvah of Milah. Dafka b'yesh lo arla. If you have an arla, so then the mitzvah to remove it. Aval be'ein lo arla eino mitzvah. But there is no arla, then there's no mitzvah. What does he mean? Hatafas dan bris says hatafas dan bris, yes, but I already wrote earlier lahar b'shita saying midrabanan. So midrabanan they require you to do something. If it's Torah, if there's no arla, whether it's a child born without an arla or the arla was removed improperly, you have a ger abal hiskayer, and he already had a surgical. It happens at Keseder. He had the arla removed by a surgery done by a nachri, and he was a baby. There's no mitzvah of Milah there. So many hold that we need fatavas dan bris. It's only midrabanan. So what does that mean in the Torah? There's no mitzvah. So he says, what emerges is something fascinating. Here, Torah lo amra lamul el ha'arla. Torah says if there's an arla, you remove it. Shlo yehei arel. A mitzvah not to be an arel. In eno arel, but if he's no longer an arel, anyhow, no lad mo. A baby was born without a milah. O nechtachar lasav idei psulim. He had a circumcision done by a nachri. O nimo tauch zmano. O balai, they did a bris at night. They did a bris during the first week. Ein ha mitzvah chala alav ki ein lo arla. In the case where there is no arla, maybe there just is no mitzvah whatsoever. It says when you have an arla, there's a mitzvah to do it the right way. There are rules for how to do it. There's no arla, there's no mitzvah. He says, fascinating. This is where he comes sort of like Minchas Chinuch type thinking. He says, think about tzitzis. Who would have ever put together arla with tzitzis? Right? If you have a four-cornered garment, if I have a four-cornered garment, so then I have a mitzvah. If I don't have, and then there are specific rules for how you make the tzitzis. But if my garment doesn't have four corners, so then I have no mitzvah at all. I don't even have a chiyuv to get a beged arba kanfas. Right? We know the Gemara says in Menachos that there was an Amor of Katena who rounded off his tzitzis like this. So we know mitzvah of Milah, we know mitzvah of tzitzis. And the Malach told him, not a good idea. When there's anger in Shamayim, you're going to be on the short end of the stick. Okay, but if it's but technically speaking, I'm not mechuyev to make sure I have a four-cornered garment. Minig Yisrael is to seek, even though I'm not mechuyev to wear a four-cornered garment. If I'm wearing a four-cornered garment, I have to put on tzitzis. If I don't have a four-cornered garment, I'm garnished. But Minig Yisrael is we seek out opportunities to do mitzvahs. We seek out that's chib of mitzvah. He goes on to give another example. He says, bir chametz. There's a mitzvah of bir chametz. So let's say everyone in the house is gluten sensitive. Everyone in the house is celiac. We don't have any chametz in the house. There is no chametz in the house. Are you mechuyev to go out and buy some chametz 2 days before Pesach so you could burn it on our Pesach? Probably not. He gets that further in Parshas Bo. Probably not. If you have chametz, it's a mitzvah to destroy it. You don't have any chametz. There's no requirement. I'll give you another example. There's a mitzvah of paying your workers on time. You have an employee. If you pay him on the day that the salary is due, you fulfill a mitzvah daraisa. Am I mechuyev to go out of my way to find employee, to hire someone? Just so I can have a mitzvah? No. Listen, I don't want to hire. I work by myself. I don't need any employees. To say, it's a bittul ha-mitzvah, it's wrong of you. Why are you being involved? No. That's what we call, what the Rambam refers to as a mitzvah or a shus. It's a contingent mitzvah. Rama writes, talks about this in the last chapter of Hilchos Brachos. A mitzvah rishos, not optional, but contingent. If I'm wearing a beged and arba kanvas, then I have a mitzvah tzitzis. If I'm not wearing the beged and arba kanvas, I have no chiyuv. If I have employees, so then I have a mitzvah to pay them on time. But I'm not mechuyev to have employees. Rama writes, according to Yerushalmi, if you live in a house, you're mechuyev to have mezuzah. Let's say I want to live in a tent. Fellow lives in a tent all his life. Fellow lives in a trailer his entire life. There's not mechuyev in mezuzah. There's nothing wrong with that. Says the Minchas Chinuch something remarkable, shocking. Take a look at the bottom line. It says, how about Milah? He says, look, if Hatavas Bris is only Rabbanan, so that means, and thinking about what we've been talking about from the beginning, that the sort of the unique physical, the unique sort of practical, logistical aspect of Milah, it's a sort of activity you can only do once, or no times. That person has the arla, you remove it, that's it. And if a fellow does not have an arla, born without an arla, or was already removed in a non-mitzvah fashion, so there is no arla. So he says, the mitzvah, this is says, Minchas Chinuch is suggesting, maybe Milah is also a mitzvah harashas. To have an arla, the mitzvah to remove it, and remove in the following way, with a Jewish mohel, biyom hashmini, bayom, and so on and so forth. But he says something wild. Torah at the very bottom of page at base. Torah the Torah said, right? The mitzvah Milah on day 8. Torah says in this week's parsha, Parsha Lech Licha. Torah says in Parsha Shmini. What does that mean? If I do a Bris Milah before the day 8, Pesach Tshuva causes a Shakar Sarye. Am I yotze anything before day 8 or not? Let's assume that Milah before day 8 is 0. No, you haven't fulfilled anything. But still, he says, nearly the Torah what that means is that the Torah said the mitzvah starts on day 8. There is no chiyuv Milah before day 8, and I cannot be mekayim before day 8. He says, just like the mitzvah tashbisu, the mitzvah to destroy chametz is the same thing. There's no chiyuv and there's no kiyum. If I destroy, according to the vast majority of Rishonim, if I destroy the chametz 3 days before Pesach, 8 days before Pesach, okay. But at the same time, I'm not mechuyev. I haven't done something wrong if I destroyed ate up all the chametz in advance. I missed out the opportunity to do a mitzvah. But it's not a bittul ha-mitzvah in the sense that not wearing tefillin is a violation, a forbidden violation of the mitzvah of tefillin. You were mechuyev to wear tefillin, you didn't. Here, he suggests something radical. That Milah is the chiyuv begins on day 8. So if you no longer have an arla, okay. So mitzvah rishos, it doesn't apply to these circumstances. If you're not a Cohen, you can't duchen. Is there something wrong with that? No, the mitzvah doesn't apply. So he suggests radical to do. He says there's no issur in doing the Milah early. It's a crying shame because you could have had a mitzvah that you're not going to have. It's a violation of chiyuv of mitzvah. But he says, and we'll have to end with this because Marv is about to begin. We'll have to hang around afterwards for questions. He says that to do the Milah early is the same as choosing to not wear a beged arba kanvas. You're choosing to opt out of the chiyuv, but it's not a violation. Again, this flows from the threads we discussed. I will say thank you so much for joining. Tonight was an experiment, but let's be in touch in the next couple of days about putting together a halacha series going forward.
Yes.
Trevor, thank you so much. I'm starting to hop off. Myra's about to be.